starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Supreme Court did it to me again. I woke up 10 a.m. Monday, ready to see how bad the Janus decision was going to be, and no case. I woke up on Tuesday, 10 a.m., ready to see the horrible. How bad was it going to be, only to find no decision as of yet. So I'm told Wednesday morning, 10 a.m., it is going to be decided. It will be handed down. Could they? There are only two cases left. There's the Janus versus AFSCME Council 31 case, and there's also the Florida versus Georgia. Two of the cases that I've been watching and wanting desperately to find out how the high court hath cometh down. I have a pretty good feeling of how they're going to screw over working people. I mean, if you look at this session and what they've done, you look at the mandatory arbitration decision they came out with, which, congratulations, in order to get a job, you have to sign your life away. No problem at all. And as one person told me, they went on a number of websites where you apply for jobs online. And this is the new thing. Everything's online. It's not like when I first started working where you just go knock on a door and go, hey, I need it. Yeah, you hiring? Yeah, here. And I tell people this. The first 3 jobs I had, I never filled out an application. I walked in. I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. They go, okay, can you start right now? Pick up the bucket of nails, do this, do that, bang. There you go to work. Now everything's online. Everything is, go to the website. And this is a way to weed out the undesirables. Any of those people. And not just those people, but old people. Get rid of the old people too. So this person was telling me that, they were going to these websites and filling out applications. And every time you would come to the place where it says, sign this forced arbitration clause, if you clicked no, the application just went away. Gone. So, you have a choice. And I often tell this story about, when I went to have a hip injection done, and the doctor handed me, the doctor's office handed me this stack of forms to fill out and, basically sign my life away on. And one of them was a forced arbitration agreement. And I went back to the person at the window and I said, I'm not signing this. And they're like, well, you have to. I go, no, I don't have to do anything. And the doctor, wanted to argue about it and all this stuff. And it wasn't like I had a choice. There's no choice in that. So this idea that, you have freedom, nonsense. Your freedom is being taken away from you every day by the people who believe in small, less intrusive government. They just believe in really powerful corporate special interest. So again, no case today. No Janus, no Florida versus Georgia. Because, for a while I was hoping that, Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, their National Guards would all attack each other right at the border there, because they're all fighting over water. That's what that case is over, and it'll be interesting to see how the court comes down on that. Now, obviously, the big case today, the Supreme Court basically gave Trump carte blanche to do, whatever he wants on the foreign policy front with immigration, and he's trumpeting it as a huge win. And I expect the Muslim ban, his words, not mine, his Muslim ban to get much more invasive, much larger. And this, again, another one of these moments where elections have consequences. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. We'll talk a little bit later with Representative Ro Khanna about what the Supreme Court decided. But this is another one of those moments where, every day there's someone saying, history is going to remember this. Which side of history are you going to be on? Will you be on the right side of history? Will you be on the side that is standing up against injustice and indignity and inhumanity and go down the list of everything this administration has brought to us? And which side of this were you on? To me, it's a pretty simple kind of situation. And while we're, focused on this, we're still not sure all of the kids are going to get back to their parents. We still hear horror stories, and I watched some horror stories of how these kids were snatched from their parents. People who had come here from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, and they called ahead. They did everything that they could do to do it the right way. And this is the thing that just infuriates me. They were trying to do it the quote-unquote right way. And what ended up happened to them? They got snatched up, they got arrested, they got charged with crimes, and they got their children taken away. And who knows where in this country those kids are. And this is 2018. This is who we've become. And as I was watching these stories, CNN had a bunch of the people on there, and obviously I can't understand them. I was reading the subtitles of what they were saying, and the one woman was sleeping, and they just came, they snatched the kid away, and you go, how do you do that? But again, this is what this administration is all about, and for me, the fact that there's been so much outrage. And there's been so much organizing going on around this. It gives me hope. Now, the big thing that I'm concerned about is, I go back to 2010. I watched the Tea Party, and I remember at the time going, this is going to turn ugly, because eventually, people on the left, people in the center, people, the sane among us. Everyone outside of the tea twizzlers and the enraged, the talk radio, the right-wing talk radio audiences who were, just whipped into a frenzy. The guy who just a couple of miles from where I live, screamed at Arlen Specter, "You get your government hands off my Medicare." And, if you remember that moment with Arlen Specter, the guy just in his face screaming at him, calling him everything but a decent American. And I remember at that moment going, could this become that powder keg? Well, the left is now going through some of that as well. And it's because I believe that, they've had enough. You can only put up with so much bullying. You can only put up with so much of the insanity that we saw from 2010 all the way up and through until Obama left office. All of the attacks, all of the craziness, all of that. And finally people are on who have had enough. And you see, like Mitch McConnell, him and his wife are, I guess leaving, and you've got a bunch of protesters saying, "Hey, how do you sleep at night? How do you do this and not be disgusted by looking at yourself in the mirror?" And, Elaine Chao is like, "You leave my husband alone." And go, he's the guy who did this. He's responsible for this stuff. And now we find out that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to get a Secret Service detail because someone politely asked her to leave a restaurant. That's what it is. Someone polite. I wonder what they would have done. I wonder what would have happened had, someone akin to the guy screaming at Arlen Specter would have screamed at her in the restaurant and her family. I wonder would they send out the National Guard? Would there be, tanks? Would she get a Pope mobile? I mean, would we put her in something like the Big Bubble to shuttle her around? And this is what their policies have brought us. This is what the Trump administration's rhetoric, this is what their policies have brought us. They've brought us to a place where, there's going to be a period of incivility because, people have had enough. The Democratic idea of when they go high, when they go low, we go high, I always thought was stupid. When they go low, you push them in the dirt. You smack them down so that they never go low again. And this is, maybe this moment where the left finally wakes up to you can't constantly be the one who's tolerant. At some point, maybe you have to take a stand. And all I've heard this last couple of days is how, well, the left talks about being tolerant. We've put up with this. We've put up with this stuff for years of right-wing bullies shooting their mouth off, making accusations, retweeting Nazi sympathizers, the outward nastiness that's come out of this Republican Party and their talk media heads. I got to be honest, it's about damn time that someone says enough already. The attacks on the working class of this country have come so fast and so furious that the people who are just trying to make it to tomorrow, the people who are just trying to support their families, keep a roof over their head, food on the table, clothes on their back, they've had enough. And I'm hoping at some point this equates to more than just yelling at Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Elaine Chao or that idiot who runs the Department of Homeland Security, who's evidently not bright enough to not think that it would be a great idea to go to a Mexican restaurant while you're stealing children from their parents on the Mexican border. I don't know who told her that was a good idea. I don't know what simpleton said, hey, there's a great idea, other than someone who's just cruel and thoughtless. And it's about time that people have said, you know what, we're not putting up with this anymore. And now my hope is, again, that it's more than just a couple of issues. It becomes across the board. And we start looking at every facet of what these conservatives have done to our American dream, have done to our country. Everything that these people have attacked, assaulted, destroyed, ripped apart. It's time for us to say, you know what, no more, and we're turning the corner. And I'm hoping this is that moment. And that we take this anger, we take this fervor, we take this energy, we take this willingness to take to the streets and shut things down, this willingness to say, I've had enough, I'm angry, I'm mad as hell and I'm not taking it anymore. I hope we take it to the polls in November, because that's what matters. That's how we return power to the people. That's how we turn this ship around and undo all of the damage that this administration has done in a very short period of time. The thing is, this administration will be remembered as the worst in history and the most destructive. Even if they left office right now, they have been destructive. And these Supreme Court decisions that are coming down are completely changing the landscape of life in this country. And it's going to get worse if we let it. And that's the key, if we let it. That's why, again, get out, talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, register people to vote. And in November, get out there and turn this country around. Lots to get to. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision that didn't happen. Tomorrow, I'm hoping, Wednesday it comes. And we're going to find out what unions are doing to prepare, what labor leaders are doing to prepare their members, what the members are doing, and what kind of things are going to happen once this decision, and how fast it's going to happen when we come back. I'll take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Own 90% of the wealth, 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day 1,400 workers at the Milwaukee Electric Railway and Light Company launched a 4-day strike. 3 unions, representing about a third of the total employees, were fighting to break the hold of the company union. The Transit and Power Company had already fired 13 workers for union activity. IBEW, Operating Engineers, and the Amalgamated Association of Street and Electric Railway Employees Union led the walkout. walkout. They demanded reinstatement of their fired coworkers. They also wanted the right to pick their own bargaining representatives and insisted the company union rescind its policy of barring strikers from membership and further employment. The walkout began early in the morning as strikers surrounded car barns, garages, and power plants. Company agents barricaded facilities with barbed wire, supplied Pullman cars for strikebreakers, and posted armed guards on streetcars. Almost immediately, striker Joseph Urbanski was mowed down and seriously injured as he tried to stop a scab streetcar. By nightfall, 5,000 strikers and their supporters had blocked 5 transit lines. They ripped protective screens from the streetcar windows and forced scab drivers to abandon their routes. As crowds swelled to 10,000 on the second day of the strike, a little more than half of all cars were in service. More than 100 streetcars had been damaged. Socialist Mayor Daniel Hoehn placed the blame squarely on the utility company. Street battles with police and scabs continued into the third day of the strike. Milwaukee's Federated Trades and Building Trades Councils threatened a general strike in the city by July 2nd if the strike was not settled. By June 30th, workers celebrated total victory when the company conceded to all of their demands. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Yeah, this one's for the workers who toil night and day, by hand and by brain, to earn your pay for.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So like I said, today was supposed to be the big decision handed down, and I guess this plays right into what I said back in February, that it was going to be the last case that the Supreme Court throws behind them as they're running out the door. To get away from whatever's going to happen, because this is going to change the landscape of the labor movement for the future, into the future. And you know, this is going to be a legacy moment for the Roberts Court. If you remember, during the ACA hearing, he was cognizant of the reason he voted in favor of leaving it in place while cutting out the Medicaid part of it was that he was thinking of the legacy of the court. If this Janus decision goes the way that I think the vast majority of us believe it will, the legacy of this court is going to be one of extreme anti-worker decisions. And it's not just Janus. You go back to the Epic Systems, you go back to the Rennes Center. There's a bunch of cases that this court has decided that has been just horrible for working people. And here to share some thoughts on the potential damage this Janus decision could do, I've asked Fred Kowal to come talk with us. He's the president of the United University Professions. He represents more than 40,000 members across New York State who work in the state university system there, and also their 4 campuses and also their hospitals. Fred, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
So the last time we talked about this, the case had just been heard. Anthony Kennedy went after the union lawyer. Everybody from that point till now is looking at doom and gloom. What are your thoughts?
Well, you when you're involved in this business, you always hold out hope that perhaps the wisdom of the respondent's case would come through, and maybe as you just said, maybe John Roberts will have a flicker of common decency in him, and he'll be thinking about his legacy. And saying, do you really want to take away power from the state, crush what's left of the labor movement, and lock in place really a redo of the Gilded Age of the late 19th century? Is that what he wants his legacy to be? On the other hand, when you see the string of decisions that they've been making over the last few days, and also as you track what the court's doing, it's clear Justice Alito hasn't said all that much. He hasn't written many opinions. He's due to write the one on Janus. So our philosophy, and I've seen it in a number of the unions, is to be thinking beyond Janus, to do organizing work, aggressive organizing wherever we can, with the idea of, let's make the Supreme Court irrelevant. Let's make the Trump government irrelevant by just organizing everywhere and really doing a good job of educating our members and labor in general of the necessity for unions to put a check on what is becoming just rampant elitist corporatism in what is emerging to be an authoritarian government. We have one party government right now, from the courts to the presidency to Congress, and they are laying waste to the progressive the progress we've made through progressive legislation going back to FDR and earlier. And we have got to, in the working class, in the union movement, we have to organize. We have to wake up our fellow sisters and brothers to alert them to what the dangers are, because we're up against it. This is class warfare, and if you don't believe it, they have weaponized the First Amendment in this case to turn it against workers, to crush unions, and it's part and parcel with what's been happening in terms of the Constitution being torn apart and used for the purposes of the elites. It really is just shocking to see this happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's, and I've been talking about this for the last couple of days, that there's a very slim sliver of hope that I have that Roberts gains a conscience and actually follows through on his ideology of being a tenther and following states' rights and not using the court's decision as a bludgeon over the head of 22 states, when there is a way for those 22 states, if they were to so choose, to pursue right to work. There's a way for them to do that. They don't need the court to sing the edict from the mount, if you will.
Right, and here we would see again a contradiction of the so-called conservative values of saying, well, the court ought not to legislate. You're right. Let's have the state legislatures in those states do what the people of the states want to have done. Clearly, in New York, there is absolutely no interest in going right to work. Then it should not be dictated to from the federal government. It really is, a situation where you just can't find any consistency with this court. Except
I can find consistency. The consistency is they're going to bow to the moneyed interest in the corporate elite at every turn. There was a study done, I think it was like a year or two ago, before Gorsuch was on the court, that something like 78% of all of the cases that went before the court where corporate interests were at question, the decisions went toward the corporate interests.
I've always maintained that it has only been the exception to the rule in just a few years in American history. And even then, there wasn't much movement in the direction of limiting capital. But we had that brief period of a so-called liberal court during the Warren Court era. But to me, that's the exception that proves the rule. That the Supreme Court has always been the bastion of the capital interests, and we're seeing it now more than we ever have. Except for you can look back to the time period in the 19th century when it was like this as well. The difference was you had an emergent labor movement. You had other elements of the progressive movement. Right now, because labor has been beaten down so extensively and unions have been weakened, that's the fear. That will we have the institutional strength to respond to this attack? I'm still optimistic we will, because Friedrichs and before it Harris were the bellwethers. They were the warning signs that this was coming, and we were prepared. As soon as Mitch McConnell manipulated the constitutional process to ensure that a Republican president, in his hope, could fill an empty seat on the Supreme Court, denying it to Barack Obama. And then when the election turned out, we knew there was going to be a case come up, and it would go this way. Well, that being said, we've been organizing. A lot of the public sector unions have been organizing as never before to get members to recommit. We're doing a strong educational campaign, and we have to. The rest of the labor movement is depending on us to do this so that then we can build going forward. We have to.
No, you have to, because look, understand the Koch brothers and their ilk, they're not going to stop after this decision is made. This is another one of the death of 1,000 paper cuts. The next push is to push for this Equal Employee Rights Act, or whatever it is they're trying to push, which is basically saying that if you pay dues, the union has to come to you and ask if they can engage in any political issues whatsoever. Which again is a way to neuter the unions and get them out of politics, which shows me what their the people pushing this poison, what their real agenda is. It has nothing to do with the workers' rights or with their First Amendment rights or their paycheck. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about political power.
It is, and you see that unique convergence with the Republican Party. All they're interested in is gaining and holding power. They don't have an agenda that speaks to anything except enriching the super elites and crushing any resistance wherever it may come from. And certainly they recognized a while ago that the workers' movement, as indicated in unions, though the union movement has shrunk, we still had the institution and the resources to be able to fight them and to support progressive causes.
Right.
And yes, they are absolutely using any weapon, and they will keep coming. We've seen it. They want to do divide and conquer in unions and in labor, and that's what we have to be cognizant of. That's why I regret, if this was happening at a time when the institutions of the workers' movement were stronger, we'd be able to resist it. But that means that the pressure's on those of us who are in it, that we have to speak the truth to power and not be afraid to take some chances. We're going to have to. The union movement for a time has been has been conservative, very moderate, and that has served us. But now, we have to be, the canary in the coal mine. We have to make clear that this is class warfare, and we have to respond with strength, with real vigor, with unity, and we have to go across the working class and not just see this as a union fight. This is a workers' fight.
No, you're absolutely right. And to highlight your point of class war, I mean, even Warren Buffett says, look, it's class warfare. My class is winning, but we shouldn't be. And this is the part that gets me. How is it that we in the working class, some of us, have looked at Donald J. Trump as the savior of the working class and then look back at their unions and go, you're the reason we're struggling?
Yeah. It's amazing how, reality has been flipped. And I oftentimes say to my members and in lots of settings, I understand, those who have resources and have have higher incomes and have wealth, they want to have a comfortable life. But this is even beyond greed. How much is enough? How much do they have to take from the working class and what's usually called the middle class? I think there's too much emphasis in America on the middle class, and it's all about the middle class.
That's why I don't
talk
use
about
it.
The working class.
No, that's why I don't use it. I'm a working class guy. I may live in what is considered a middle class neighborhood, but I get up and I punch a clock. I go to work every day.
That's right. And there needs to be pride in that, and there needs to be an emphasis that, yes, labor does create the wealth in this society. And now what's happened is, again, as it usually happens throughout a capitalist system, capital has emerged stronger than ever, utilizing and manipulating the political levers to its own self-aggrandizement and to the detriment of labor.
Yeah,
and,
the pendulum's gone way too far to one side.
Way too far.
So the question then becomes, you look at what happened in Oklahoma, you look at what happened in Kentucky and West Virginia, you look at this kind of uprising of people who don't have a lot of power. In Oklahoma, they don't have the right to bargain. West Virginia has very limited rights. Is that the model going forward to where, we're back to the streets, we're back to folding our arms and marching our feet and civil disobedience and all of that? And is this maybe what the right wing feared didn't actually think about happening, but now could be their greatest fear?
Absolutely. I think that, it's the law of unintended consequences. They may go after they're going after the institutions of the labor movement by going after unions. Well, then what will be left? What will be left is, in the cases of a lot of the public sector unions, where you'll have some people who will quit and they'll be freeloaders. But those that will be left will be truly determined and committed to the unions. They may also be much more radicalized by the conflict to come. The conflict to come, meaning the one in the streets that you're talking about.
No, I think that has to happen. I've been saying for a while, is this the moment where you guys as labor leaders declare this is the end of industrial peace? The New Deal era is over. It's time to, to go back to the fights of the 1880s and 1890s and that kind of militancy until, you make things uncomfortable to the point to where they want to bring that labor peace back.
That's correct. That's what has to happen, and I think that it's a challenge for us. And yet, what we're seeing, those of us who are leaders in the labor movement, is that it's the classic case. You know, there are our people running forward, you know, in the streets in Oklahoma, West Virginia, all across America, standing up, and we have to run to catch up to them because they're leading the way, and they're showing us the way.
Yeah.
Where there is that conflict that needs to happen, to the extent where we present a real challenge to the powers that be.
Now, last question I've got for you. Do you think the movement's ready? I mean, I have conversations with leaders all the time, and you know, do you think the labor movement is ready for what is going to, the onslaught that's going to come after this?
Yes, I think so. I think that you know, if this had been a case where it had happened at Harris, which was unlikely because of the nature of the case, but could have, Alito wrote the opinion then, which he's going to, you know, it's going to be the opinion in Janus tomorrow. If it had happened then, we would not have been prepared. We are prepared now. There's a sense of urgency. I see it in our members. When we talk about recommitting to the union, they say absolutely. They only need to know a little bit to be recommitted to what we're about. And I think there's a growing passion and energy, and I see that in public sector unions all across New York, and in, you know, a part of the American Federation of Teachers, in locals all across the country. The energy is there. The passion is there. We know we cannot lose this fight, and so we won't.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying maybe this is the moment where you wake the sleeping giant, and Koch brothers beware. We shall see.
Yes, absolutely. And we're ready.
Good to hear. Fred, I appreciate the time. Best of luck to you and to your members. And as this continues, I'd love to have you back to keep us up to date on what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Anytime, Rip. Thanks.
Fantastic stuff. Thanks so much, Fred. Fred Colwell, he's the president of the United University Professions. They represent more than 40,000 members across New York State. They work in the State University of New York system, their hospitals and universities. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Ones to starve, we're the first ones to die. The first ones in line for that pie in the sky. And we're always the last when the crab is shed out. For the worker is working when the fat counts the ball. We're the first ones to starve. We're the first ones to die.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1893. That was the day that Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld pardoned Samuel Fielden, Oscar Neebe, and Michael Schwab, who were imprisoned for their alleged role in the Haymarket bombing of 1886. 8 men had been accused of throwing a bomb at a workers' rally in Chicago. 4 were hung. 1 died in prison before he could be executed, and 3 were incarcerated. Governor Altgeld had been born in Germany. He was a progressive leader who helped pass worker safety laws and child labor laws. Efforts to free the 3 Haymarket prisoners had been underway since their sentencing. During the trial, there was no physical evidence linking any of the accused men to the crime. Governor Altgeld agreed to look into the case. He issued a report outlining his findings. At the end, he concluded, quote, "The trial was not fair." He wrote, quote, "I'm convinced that it is clearly my duty to act. I grant an absolute pardon to Samuel Fielden, Oscar Neebe, and Michael Schwab this 26th day of June, 1893. This pardon came just 1 day after a monument to the martyrs was dedicated at the cemetery where the 5 martyrs were buried. Today, part of Governor Altgeld's pardon is inscribed on a plaque on the back side of that monument. Governor Altgeld paid a political price for the pardon. He was attacked by the press. The Chicago Tribune attacked his German heritage, declaring there was, quote, "not a drop of true American blood in his veins. He does not reason like an American, does not feel like one, and consequently does not behave like one." In 1896, he lost his bid at re-election for standing up for justice. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith. The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So a big day on the Supreme Court. While I was expecting the Janus case to come down today, we live another day. The court did come down on the Muslim ban, and the Trump people are screaming victory and dancing. And I can't tell you, I've gotten a bunch of emails from people going, see, I told you, keep those Muslims out of here. I got to tell you, this is, I think, some of the tweets I've seen from congressmen and from folks, thoughtful people going, this is going to be one of those moments in history that future generations will look back on us and go, what exactly were you doing? And here to share some of his thoughts on the Supreme Court's decision and maybe how we move forward as a nation, I've asked Congressman Ro Khanna to come talk with us. Congressman, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me back on.
So, I guess, what are your thoughts of this decision? Were you surprised by it?
I was, because I thought someone like Justice Roberts at least would have some reverence for the Constitution, some sense of history, some sense of his own reputation. And this is really going to be a black mark, a stain on the Supreme Court. I mean, it undercuts all of our constitutional values and the progress we made in the civil rights movement, which says very basically that you don't discriminate based on national origin. You don't discriminate based on religion. And what this ban does is singles out countries that are largely Muslim. Now, by adding Venezuela and North Korea, the Trump administration isn't fooling anyone. I mean, they are really going after people who come from Muslim-majority countries. And just to make it concrete, if this ban were in place, we may never have had Steve Jobs, because Steve Jobs' father was Syrian. He came to this country in the 1950s or 1960s to the University of Wisconsin, where he met Steve Jobs' mother. I mean, basically, he wouldn't have been allowed to come to the country, and we may never have had Apple computers. So it's incredibly short-sighted.
Yeah, I agree. But, what do you say to the argument that, well, it's not all Muslim countries, Ro. It's, it's just those ones who really hate us.
Well, first of all, the populations of these countries aren't the ones that are hating us. It's often, in some cases, the regimes. And secondly, the worst way to deal with the situation is to ban those folks from coming to the United States, because they're going to hate us even more. Now, here is the thing that people need to keep in mind. It's not like we're just letting folks in from these countries without vetting. The president keeps talking about extreme vetting. Well, let me tell you, extreme vetting is already happening. You have to go through 6 or 7 agencies to come to the United States. You go through the Homeland Security Agency, through the State Department, through the local embassy. There's a huge background check. There have not been any identified instances of people coming from these countries engaged in domestic terrorism. So the impression that we're just letting in folks who are a security threat is absolutely false. What we're doing is offending people in these regions and stowing more hatred towards the United States.
Yeah, I mean, but you listened to Trump the other day, and I forget the exact quote, but it was like, why does the other side love all these people more than they love Americans? I don't believe that, they commit crimes at a lower rate than we do, and that they're better than us. And however his rambling, nonsense went on, but it was kind of the gist of it that he facts be damned, any rational thought be damned. He believes, and the sad reality is that plays with the I believe crowd.
Well, the sad thing is that Trump has a very nativist, parochial view of America, and it's very different even than Ronald Reagan's view. I mean, Ronald Reagan said that something about America represents the universal human spirit, and it's the only place where you can come from anywhere in the world and be American. And that is what makes America, as he put it, the shining city, and what makes us innovative, that we can have folks from Syria coming and giving us Steve Jobs that leads to Apple computers. We can have these immigrants coming so that they're creating some of the most brilliant technology inventions in the United States. It's what allows America, a much smaller country, to be far more innovative than countries with much larger populations. And Trump is undermining all of that, and it's really ironic because he wants America to be great, and yet he's parroting the policies of the Ming Dynasty back in the 15th century. I mean, the reason China stagnated is they were closed to the rest of the world, and he is his policies are really hurting our nation's interests.
Is there a legislative way to work around this? I mean, is this going to be the law of the land? And I guess the other side of this, does this now expand beyond the narrow number of countries that he originally laid out in his ban? Does this expand to, whoever he wants now? Did they give him carte blanche power to ban anyone?
Well, it's important to realize, as you do, Rick, that the Supreme Court didn't mandate that these countries or people from these countries need to be banned. It said that the president has the authority to do that. And the reason that the Supreme Court has said that is because Congress has not weighed in. So there is a Supreme Court jurisprudence, a doctrine that says that the Supreme Court will defer to the branch of government that is more active. And in this case, the president has weighed in, saying that we should be banning people from these countries for national security. And Congress, unfortunately, has been silent. Congress, in this case, like in foreign policy, has relinquished our duty by remaining silent, and so the courts will defer to the president. If Congress wanted to, we could pass a law tomorrow that says that we don't believe people from these countries should be banned, that there should be a background check and, of course, the proper examination before they're let in, but that we should continue to have anyone from the world be able to come to the United States. Many Democrats believe in that. There's some moderate Republicans who believe in that, but the Speaker of the House would never let such a bill come to the floor.
Yeah, because he has no idea how it would vote, or actually he probably does. But let me ask you the other side of this then, because, I get a lot of people saying, well, okay, you're against the ban. What should our immigration policy look like? Are we talking about swinging the doors open? And because I get this all the time, you're just going to let MS-13 walk right in and take over? What is the way forward? Is there a number of people we allow in? Is there a control? Is there any of that in your view?
Of course, no one is saying that we, as a country, should just let anyone in. That would be terrible policy. But going back since 1933, we had enforcement in this country, and it was done under the Justice Department, where we made sure that people's rights were respected, that we weren't splitting up families, that we were treating kids with humanity, but that we were making sure that people had to go through a background check and weren't just coming into this country breaking laws. And so everyone, I believe, in Congress, most of my colleagues want to have an enforcement agency, but we want an enforcement agency that upholds civil rights and that treats people consistent with the principles of our Constitution.
And doesn't rip children away from their mothers in jail, 3-month-old babies, and rip children away from their fathers and have them all over the country. I mean, I don't know if you've been following some of these stories, but it's heartbreaking as a parent to watch these parents go, you know what, I was sleeping and my child was taken from me. I don't know where my child is. It's just heartbreaking. And this, I got to be honest, this isn't who we, at least I hope this isn't who we are.
And it's not who we are. I mean, I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I was one of the only Indian Americans in Bucks County. Now things have changed. And I was treated with great respect and decency and kindness. And our neighbors would go out of their way to help my family. I mean, it was that's the American spirit. And, honestly, my wife and I were talking, and this is going to be 42, and this is probably the first time that viscerally I felt embarrassed for our country. I mean, there have been times where I vehemently disagreed with policy. I thought the Iraq War was a colossal blunder. But I never felt that George W. Bush, as much as I disagreed with him and thought he made strategic decisions, I never felt that he lacked basic decency and humanity as a person. In this case, this is just barbaric to have toddlers crying and separating them from their parents. You would never think that would happen in the United States. And fortunately, it was put to an end within 3 days. I mean, that part of it, because of the outrage of the country. And that speaks well of the country. What is unfortunate is the people we have in charge. But then, Madison warned us that our system of government was designed assuming that we wouldn't always have enlightened people at the helm.
Yeah, I hear that. I get my Tea Party friends reminding me of the the tree of liberty being, quenched with the blood of tyrants and patriots. I get that quote all the time. And I'm going, no, we're not. And I guess maybe are we at almost like a kind of a Civil War moment? Because, you look at, and I find it really ironic that, just a couple of days ago, someone was telling me that, gay people shouldn't be able to have cake and business owners should be able to do whatever they want. And then this very same person telling me that they were outraged that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was sent packing. Is this where we're going to be battling this?
Well, I think we are at a very polarized time where people aren't listening to each other. I don't think we're at a time of a civil war that would be not being sufficiently respectful of the extraordinary sacrifices of those who fought in the Civil War. Or there used to be times in our country where people would actually get into fist fights and cane each other on the floor of the House, and we're not quite that bad. But I think what we're struggling with is a concept of America. What does it mean to be American? And when I was growing up, there was a pretty clear sense of that. In Philadelphia, you had to be an Eagles fan or a Phillies fan, but more broadly, you respected the Liberty Bell. You understood that the Constitution was an important document. You believed in the Declaration of Independence. You studied Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And there was a sense that there were some collective things that defined us as Americans. And every immigrant didn't take away from that collective. It's not like my family came in here and said, okay, that diminishes the Constitution or Declaration of Independence. In fact, the immigrants tend to be the most patriotic, and then they add their culture. So now you can have, Bollywood dance, but still believe in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the Gettysburg Address. And it was additive to American culture. And somehow now what we've gotten is a politics that says that the immigrant experience is subtractive. And we've got to go back to here's what the core of being American means, and let's celebrate the additions that people are bringing in.
Do you think that has a lot to do with maybe the economic hardships that many people across this country, especially the white working class of this country, who have seen their jobs just stolen away through deindustrialization and horrible trade policies? Do you think that has a lot to do with it? Because I tend to believe that when we were all living those kind of similar lives, when we all had similar beliefs, and we're kind of in the middle of the road. We all believed in this idea that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you got ahead. And sadly, for so many in this country, that's not the reality anymore.
I agree with you. I think the deindustrialization of our towns and the lack of opportunity for people in many communities has a lot to do with frustration. I think they look at it and said, some of these recent immigrants have come, and look at them. They're doing great. They're starting these companies in Silicon Valley, and they're making all this money. Our parents, our grandparents died for this country. We fought in World War II. We fought in many wars. We've built the industry. What's happening to our kids? What is their prospect? And that's why I think the Democrats have to begin by an acknowledgement that we did not pay sufficient attention to communities across America, that we have to do far more to bring jobs and economic opportunity to places left behind, and recognize the talent and the hard work there, and recognize that some of our policies have not been fair in creating economic opportunity there. And so, to me, that positive economic agenda has to be front and center for the Democratic Party. And then second, I do think there has to be some sense of a new patriotism and a recognition that while we should celebrate the incredible diversity from around the world and the new ideas that people are bringing, we shouldn't be afraid to say that this is an exceptional nation, that this is a nation where you have the opportunity to be judged for your ideas, and that you can make anything of your life from wherever you're coming from, and that there are a set of common philosophical principles that unite us as Americans, and that we have a better system of government than China or autocratic governments or places where there's corruption. The Democrats should not let the Republicans appropriate patriotism.
No, I'm right there with you, especially when you look at the Republican version of patriotism, and it's a very authoritarian view. It's a very, you do what you're told, when you're told, how you're told, and no one diverge from that. And I fear that kind of a mentality.
I do too. And look, what I would say to to folks anywhere in this country is: do you wish that Apple and Google and all these tech companies were Chinese companies? Do you wish that all the innovation that was happening somewhere else? How do you propose we compete with 1.2 billion people in China? I'll tell you how I think we will compete and win, because we don't have top-down decision-making. We have a distributed model of decision-making. We believe in entrepreneurs and small business owners, and we like new ideas and people coming from other parts of the world challenging our ideas. That's what keeps us innovative. That's what's going to allow us to win. What Trump is doing is actually copying a authoritarian top-down decision-making model and a protectionist model that has never won in history. So I think the Democrats should say, we have the plan to have America's economy grow and to make sure America leads the 21st century. Follow our vision. It's not just that we feel an empathy for the marginalized, for people in other parts of the world. Of course, we have a concern for human rights and human dignity. It's actually that the vision we are proposing is what's going to allow America to succeed in this new world.
Yeah, last line of question I've got for you, because you're talking about this vision, and do you get it out? I mean, are the Democrats going to be able, through all the noise that the Trump and his Twitter account have caused, are you going to be able to get that out to the voters come November?
Well, it's very difficult, and partly it's difficult because all the media wants to talk about is the scandals, and whether Sarah Huckabee got kicked out of a restaurant or not, what's the latest on Trump's scandal on some issue or the other, and that I think doesn't help the Democratic Party, because ultimately people are saying, "What are you going to do for my kids? What are you going to do for this country?" Trump has an easier case. Trump's basically saying, I'm going to give you the life back in the 1950s or 60s, where you got to keep your old jobs and remember how things used to be. That's what I want life to be. And most people instinctively, they get that that's not possible, but they rather cling to that than fear the unknown. And the Democrats have a harder burden. We're saying the world is changing, and people get that. But then they want to know, well, what are you going to do to make sure my kid has a real shot in that world, has a real shot at the American dream? All our energy should be based on trying to answer that question. If we can convince people of that question, the rest will follow.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out by November, because everybody that I know believes that this November is the most important election of our lifetime, as every election is. But I have people always reminding me, no, seriously, this one's the most important.
I agree with that. And look, what I'm heartened by is public outrage and public sentiment still works in this country. It stopped Trump from taking away the Affordable Care Act. It has stopped Trump from at least splitting up families. I mean, they're still detaining him, but we saw that there was a response. This country is still one where mobilized individuals can make an enormous difference, and we just need to continue to mobilize. If there's any silver lining to the Trump presidency, it's the reaction it's triggered in waking up the American public.
As I said right from the start, he's going to unite the country against him. Ro, I appreciate the time. Great talking with you. Please come back and talk to us again as this continues down the road.
I appreciate it. Always love being on the show.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ro Khanna, Congressman from California. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Desperate times, so desperate measures we explore. Marching on the Capitol to lobby leaders for involvement. Company surveillance. Public divided. Either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our backs, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. You can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. So you look last few weeks that suicide rates are going up. Over the last 30 years, they've gone up. Because, look, I argue as conservative policies take over, as we become more mean-spirited, as it becomes harder to make a living, as jobs become harder to find, and decent-paying jobs become much harder to find, families struggle, and all of that negative. And, I always love hearing conservatives tell me how that they believe in family values, that, they care about the family. I always love that. And you go, well, whose family are we talking about? Are you talking about yours? I'm sure you love your family. What about the rest of ours? And not so much. And look, I worked for a guy, there was a terminal manager at one of the companies that I worked for who came in and said, I'm a family man. I believe in, family values. And then he went on to mandatory overtime every day, mandatory 6 work days, worked on holidays, just worked the death out of people. And when I threw it back at him, I go, well, what happened to the, I'm a family values guy. He goes, yeah, my family. I don't care about yours. We got work to do. And it was one of those moments where you go, yeah, perfectly right in line with who they are. And the thing that gets me is if the family values people really believed it, where are they in pushing a guarantee that when people get access to health care when they get sick? Why do we have no paid sick time or no paid family leave time for when a child is born, a child is sick or injured? Why do we have no family paid leave when a parent or a spouse is sick or injured? Why don't we have any of that stuff? Why do we have no parent leave if I'm sick or injured? Why do we get no paid leave for that? Why are there no policies? And again, this is why I say you need to have a union, because the unions do a lot of that stuff. You look as a nation, we have no vacation policy. That's left up to the benevolency of the employer or, strong unions. And we're from education funding. I mean, it's ridiculous how that's been divvied up. And oh, by the way, we're still on the agrarian clock, which, kids go to school from 8 to 2:30. What person works from 8 to 2:30? I mean, there's so many things we could be doing to push family values that we're just not doing. We could increase the minimum wage. We could give workers the right to organize and expand collective bargaining rights. We could expand Medicaid. We could have a Medicare for all, so healthcare wouldn't even be an issue. There's so many things we could be doing. But you know what we're doing? We're banning those Muslims. We're going to go strip those kids away from their parents and lock them up. We're going to rob the country blind. I mean, the thing that gets me is it's just amazing. The things that we don't know about, like, for instance, all the land that we're giving away, all of the national property that we're just handing off. There was a story the other day about Ryan Zinke in the Department of Interior. They just decided, the mining company came in, strip mined these people's property, basically ruined their property forever. And we're not going to hold them accountable. Yeah. So all you folks up in the Marcellus Shale area who've got drilling rights that you've given away, get ready for it. It's coming. And maybe you deserve it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you missed any of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Andrea Chalupa is going to be here to share some thoughts on Robert Mueller zeroing in on collusion. That's going to be interesting. Cannot wait. Quick break. Right back.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Multi-billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch want to supplant America's core democratic principle of majority rule, i.e. the will of the people, with their plutocratic principle of inviolable property rights, also known as rule by the wealthy minority. Their notion is that we the people cannot be allowed to tax the riches of the owner class, nor set rules on how they treat workers, consumers, and society as a whole. To set themselves up as the new American aristocracy, this clique of moneyed elites has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars, much of it secret, on front groups and whorish politicians. For nearly 40 years, they and their uber-rich allies have torn down legal structures and mechanisms that give ordinary people some chance to control their own destinies. The Koch's goals include killing all restrictions on political spending by corporations and the rich, suppressing voting rights of students, people of color, the elderly, and others who tend to favor democratic policies, eliminating labor unions, canceling the right of workers, consumers, and others to sue corporations that harm them, shredding the social safety net, including food stamps, Social Security, and Medicare, axing provisions to protect our environment, preempting the right of local people to pass laws that corporations oppose, and packing courts with pro-corporate judges. This is Jim Hightower saying, the Koch conspiracy's attack on our democratic rights has already rigged our country's economic and political rules so the richest of the rich can now grab ever more of our society's wealth and power, thus shattering America's commitment to the common good and creating a savage level of inequality in our land. To learn more, go to the watchdog group Center for Media and Democracy. They're at exposedbycmd.org/Koch.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, I'm still quite amused at the fact that now Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to have Secret Service detail. I guess they want to make sure she gets dessert. It's mind blowing how she was politely asked and leave, please leave. How that is well, my mind completely blown. Here, maybe to share some thoughts on how I'm not getting this, I've asked our good friend Andrea Chalupa to come back and talk with us. Journalist, author, Orwell and the Refugees, the Untold Story of Animal Farm. Also, I understand, starting a new podcast. Andrea, thanks for taking time with us.
Hi, how are you, Rick?
I'm good. I hear you're starting a new podcast.
Yes, we're starting a new podcast. Sarah and I are so excited. I was just in St. Louis with her for a couple days.
I'm thrilled to I'm thrilled to grab a hold of that.
We are going to have dueling podcasts. We're going to have our podcast will have street fights with each other. It's going to be like that scene in Anchorman.
Nice.
We look forward to that. No, I'm just kidding. Sarah and I come on your show all the time, and we have so much fun with you, and your voice is so critical and important, and we just want to sort of add to that, but just be a lot angrier.
No, look, we need that. No, yeah. we need that. We need that anger. I mean, and look, I don't know if you've been paying attention to the insanity around Sanders being sent to the curb with no dinner, sent to bed with no dinner, which, if anyone needs it, I look at her and go, yeah, you bad. Not happy with you.
Yeah, so I've been on the Red Hen TripAdvisor page, their Facebook page, their Twitter page. I've been stalking the Red Hen online because I honestly cannot wait to go there. My family's in D.C. I think what they did was incredibly brave. I really do. I think, this whole stupid debate that sprung up over civility, that's just completely cowardly. We have people that are separating. This is full-blown authoritarianism at this point. And if we pay for your salary with our tax dollars, if you're someone who's a public servant, you answer to us. And if you come out into the public space, we can treat you accordingly. You have to talk to us. And that's your job as a public servant. That's your job if your salary is paid with our tax dollars. So, these were taxpayers who run the Red Hen, and it was their right to basically say, we don't want to serve you because, what you're doing is you're destroying families. You're destroying families.
No, I'm with you. And the thing that I get is, how can you be, and I know people who this has happened. They're all in favor of no cake for you gay people. Sorry, no cake for you. But they're outraged that Sarah Huckabee Sanders didn't get dinner, and you go, how are they not the same scenario? One is a religious problem. He had a sincerely held religious belief, and I don't doubt that the cake guy, sincerely believes his religion. But I also believe that these people at this restaurant had a moral conviction that this woman is horrible.
Well, I think that's a false comparison. What some far right cake shop owners were doing, denying gay couples wedding cakes, that was unconstitutional. Because and what Sarah Sanders, what her regime has been constitutional. So denying people inside America due process of law, banning people from our country based on a religion. The Muslim ban that the Supreme Court upheld today, which is one of the darkest periods in the history of the Supreme Court in our country. So this is a regime that's unconstitutional. It's deplorable base. Like Hillary was absolutely right when during the election she called Trump's base deplorable. They absolutely are. So his base that would deny a couple a wedding cake just because they're gay, that is unconstitutional. Like we as Americans, our rights are protected. Our rights, our freedoms are protected. That's freedom of religion, freedom for the pursuit of happiness, the basic fundamental rights that our founding fathers fought for in the Revolution. This was a radical experiment that our founding fathers carried out. This was something that was intellectually, philosophically driven, where all men are equal, or all people are equal. And this is something that we're still working on and perfecting, and we have been for the centuries of our history. So you absolutely can't compare homophobes in a bakery denying a gay couple their right to pursue happiness. You can't compare that to Sarah Sanders, who's essentially the Goebbels of the Trump regime.
Well, okay, I'll go with that. But the reason I make that comparison is that you have someone who, says if a business owner wants to deny someone service, it doesn't matter what the reason is. They should be allowed to do that. And yet that very same person who in the cake case was saying, they should have the right to do that is now saying they shouldn't have the right to do it with Sanders. And it's this picking and choosing of ideology and this contradictory mentality that's really very frustrating with those on the right.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel as a business owner that you can deny someone because of their religion or who they choose to love, you have to also respect the fact that the public has a right to also confront you with those deplorable beliefs.
No, I'm with you, and this is where I've been from the very beginning. I'm uncomfortable turning anyone away from a business, because I think once you open your restaurant, your bake shop, your store, whatever, you open it to the public, it should be for all of the public. You shouldn't be allowed to turn anyone away, as long as they're not breaking the law or causing a disruption that would have them arrested. But I look at someone like Sanders and I go, you know what? She is kind of the face of everything that's horrible that's going on right now. The daughter of the Christian warrior, and then the face of the Lion King. So she was kind of the perfect poster child for this to happen to.
Absolutely. I mean, she represents this, nepotism, as you point out, like her, given who her father is. She represents this Christian far right that more and more, is trying to turn our country into the Handmaid's Tale. She represents also the Trump regime's assault on the truth and reality, facts, and journalists. And she just is up there every day. Whenever she's up there at her podium, it's just crazy. She carries out his lies for him, and she does it just so effortlessly. And the White House press corps, I mean, they're slightly getting better in calling her out, but it's like at the same time they come across as just so completely fatigued, like they can't keep up with her. And that's really what these authoritarian regimes do, is they wear you down.
Tell me about it.
Down. Yeah,
tell me about
we're all there right now.
No, I mean, look, I've been saying this for a while. I mean, I'd like a day off, please. I'd like there to be one news cycle where you go, that was boring.
One day, I miss that. I don't think we'll ever get back to that again, though. And that's a lot of what Sarah and I have talked about on the podcast. We taped 3 episodes. We meant to do 2, but we just kept going, so now we have 3. And the conclusion of the podcast, like what we really go into, is that we all crave normal. We all crave boring, but it's never going to be that again. A lot of it is because we're being just hit by so much right now, from this environmental catastrophe that's coming that we don't even talk about enough, to the crisis of income inequality, to the crisis of the labor movement, what you're on the front lines of. There's so many crises that are just coming to a boiling point at the exact same time in the world, in our country. And on top of that, we have to confront and undo the severe damage of the Trump years.
Yeah.
So we'll never, in our lifetimes, we'll never have normal again. I do want to say, though, I think it's absolutely part of our nation's history. America is this experiment that just has these generations of confronting itself and confronting its scars and really forcing change. Whether it's Civil War, whether it's the Civil Rights Movement, which was a war. People forget the Civil Rights Movement. Those rights came from young men and women putting their bodies on the front lines, and there are many deaths. You had the National Guard called in. Parts of the South was like an absolute war zone in the Civil Rights Movement. So our story of progress is a story of confronting, our nation's demons. And so we absolutely have to have examples like the Red Hen and what just happened at Georgetown University in D.C., where the Labor Secretary, Elaine Chao, who's married to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, she was confronted by a group of students. And you have to absolutely get in these people's faces. That's their role as public servants in our country, and we still have our freedoms right now to do that. And on top of that, I have to tell you, knowing a lot of activists and journalists who are covering Trump and are very outspoken about Trump, these activists and journalists, they don't always broadcast this, but you do hear stories that they're facing harassment as well. I know one prominent voice on Twitter, I won't say who because he doesn't want this out there, but one prominent voice on Twitter, he's had his home shot at. But he had to do construction on his home because somebody just sent some warning bullets into his front yard. This happens more than people are willing to discuss it because it's, of course, meant as a threat and it's scary. And so they don't want to spread that fear around and say that, look at what happened to me. But this happens. So, us, who are really pushing this regime and really confronting it, we're suffering under like their threats and attacks as well, with death threats, attempted hacking, etc. So they're pushing this conversation of like forcing us to, this discussion of being civil. It's absolutely just the typical like Trump regime smoke and mirrors. There's nothing there.
No, but there's part of me that still hopes that the Mueller investigation comes to a head sometime before the midterm, that we get some answers, that maybe we claw back some sanity, that maybe we hold some people accountable, that institutions of this country, while now shaking at its foundations, stand and fight back against this regime and maybe give us a little bit of that sense of normalcy? Or do you think I'm grasping at straws?
Well, I think everyone is hoping for that. They're hoping for that deep state Batman to come in and save us. Mueller he has an exceptional team around him. He really has the best and the brightest that he's built this incredible investigation team. But the reality is that no one knows whether people can try to claim, he'll have his report out by the midterms this November, the most important election of our lives. There's some rumors going around that he would have his report done by September 1st, that he wants it out with plenty of time before the election so he doesn't pull a Comey and look like he's politicizing the FBI. The reality is that Mueller will take the time he needs to take. He's a different animal from James Comey. He's somebody that seems more like a plodding workhorse that's just working the field, whereas James Comey had a flair for the dramatic, which set the course of our country towards this Trump train wreck.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah, exactly. And history can absolutely never forget that, because he has to live with that for the rest of his life.
But her emails.
Right.
We're ripping kids away from their families. We're banning people. We're stealing from the Treasury. We're creating debt at a pace never seen before. But her emails.
Right. Yeah. No, it's getting worse and worse. I mean, I've been abroad for the last 4 months, and I haven't wanted to come home, because I'm just like, this is getting. It's like they're not even trying to hide it anymore. It's just they're blatantly out there. They're building camps. They're not going to tell journalists where the camps are, where they're going to put people. Mattis, who is supposed to be a stabilizing force, he's been sidelined. He's now just carrying out the president's bidding and building these camps where they're going to put babies and children separated from their parents. It's just absolutely inhumane. Absolutely inhumane. But just everybody is looking to Mueller, and you can feel that in our country. You can feel that anxiety. But the reality is that Mueller has a very tough job, because essentially what he's doing is he's unraveling the tangled web of organized crime. It's essentially it's very similar to a mafia investigation, and the team he has around him. Some of them are specialists in going after the mob. So this is going to be. These are sensitive. These are highly complex. Money trails with a lot of laundered offshore accounts. So this is going to be something that's going to just take some time. But he does have a very big fish in Paul Manafort. I've always said from the very beginning that Paul Manafort himself is a smoking gun of Russiagate. So the fact that he's reeled in Manafort, and Manafort has dozens of counts against him in two separate jurisdictions, like it's looking very good that he's going to be taking down like one of the heads of this multi-headed this Hydra, this dragon. So yeah, so it is looking good, but it's just going to take time.
You mean 343? Is that
right.
What you're talking about? Formerly known as Paul Manafort?
Paulie Walnuts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was a great day. That was a great day when he finally got brought in.
But the thing is what took so long? Still waiting to find out what took so long. Because if it were you or me, we'd have been there right from the start.
Right. I mean, rich white people, the due process that they get is the luxury version than people of color, especially young people of color across the country. So it did take a while, and I'm sure Manafort, in his stupidity, because Manafort was somebody that he could have lived a life of luxury if he just stayed in Kiev. If he didn't come over and run a presidential campaign in the United States of America and become this like global name, he could have gotten away with all of his blood money crimes. Instead, he had hubris, and he came over and he just continued to be a stupid criminal. So probably what happened was the FBI, Mueller's investigation allowed Manafort to be a stupid criminal, allowed him to, try to, tamper with witnesses, and who knows what else they were eavesdropping on, surveilling him doing, because he's just so dumb and arrogant. So they probably just enjoyed letting Manafort out there in his freedom out in the open, and that probably led them to more information and more suspects.
It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Last question I've got for you. How do we get the podcast? Where is it? Where is it? How do we get it? Where and when?
Okay, so it will be launched on Dame Magazine. So excited. We're so nervous. Sarah and I, are good friends, and we talk on the phone regularly. So we thought, if we're venting to each other, if we have this friendship that's helping us prop each other up through this incredibly difficult time in the world right now, then why don't we share that love with the rest of the country and help people get through what's going to be the most critical election year in our lives since the 2016 election, of course, which we screwed up. But we have another shot now, and this is really, our country's future is really hinges on how we all strategize and plan to make a difference in 2018 for the midterms, and really send a strong message to Washington. So this is a critical year in our lives, and so Sarah and I want to give voice to a lot of people that are working to make sure that Democrats sweep the midterms, and that we can get our country onto the path of impeachment.
There you go. And I'm looking forward to marking on the calendar as we speak to make sure that we don't miss an episode.
Thank you so much. We look forward to continuing being on your podcast, Rick. So thank you for all the work you do. It's so important.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Take care. Bye.
Good stuff. Andrea Chalupa. Check out her stuff. Grab the book. And the 9th, July 9th, the Grand Podcast. Cannot wait. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
We're the first ones to die, the first ones in line for that pie in the sky, and we're always the last with the craving shade out for the worker is working when the fat counts about. We're the first ones to die, we're the first ones to die.
The most important issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
I got news for you. It's going down. Before you come home and tell me you're not angry, and I'll be leaving town.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Still kind of angry at the Supreme Court. Actually, really ticked off. At the Supreme Court. Just do your work on time, like the rest of us have to. Today and tomorrow were not scheduled. You should have had your work in on time.
Issues of the day. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Still kind of angry at the Supreme Court. Actually, really ticked off at the Supreme Court. Just do your work on time, like the rest of us have to. Today and tomorrow were not scheduled. You should have had your work in on time. No credit for being late. And to me, I would be okay if we just said, you know what? These two cases we're not going to decide. We'll just let them go. Leave it stand the way it is. Move on next. Not going to happen. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Justin Duckham, Talk Media News. Justin, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, great to be here. As you mentioned, there was no decision on Janus, but we did get a lot of news out of the Supreme Court today with the decision on the travel ban, or as the president called it during the campaign, the Muslim ban. Something that, according to John Roberts, the Chief Justice, just doesn't really matter now.
Of course it doesn't. Why would it matter?
I mean, it's interesting. That was what he wrote in his, ruling, essentially to supporting their decision today, saying that this should be viewed neutrally in terms of presidential authority, and that ultimately it should not be up to the court to make these sort of heavy judgments over the soundness of the, ban as they put it forward, or, the merits of the argument that the president made on the campaign trail. That's something that was pushed back heavily against by Sonia Sotomayor. She said that, this was something that firmly represented animus, arguing that this flew against years and years and years of legal precedent and just kind of tearing apart this argument. So a pretty monumental decision, one that is being viewed as a victory for the Trump White House, something that the president is taking a victory lap over, something that a lot of other conservative groups are as well, and basically, also being viewed as a very dark day in history by a lot of people who are critics of this as well. So a lot of emotions on both sides for a decision that, has really flown in the face of what the lower courts have argued.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty incredible. But immediately when I read what was coming out, I thought of Lewis Black. Have you ever seen him do that bit on why people hate Americans? And he's I could just see him right now going, "See, we're number one. Get out, get out. No, you're not allowed." I could just that's the voice and the image that I got from the Supreme Court decision. How screwed up is that?
I mean, I feel like Lewis Black more and more these days, just as sort of a constant internal screaming. I guess if it was Lewis Black, it'd be more external screaming, but there you go. But I guess if there is some kind of solace to be found in this, this was not what was initially put forward by the administration. This was not their very heavy-handed, very harsh, ban that they initially sought. This was the third iteration of it, one that probably most of the president's supporters would acknowledge was a watered-down version of this. And, is not necessarily giving the president everything he wanted. He previously said that, they had kind of tweaked the language and inserted some legalese to make it more palatable, but said that, maybe eventually they'll go back and try to go for what they were originally going for, since that's what he wanted. Again, comments like that apparently don't, matter in today's ruling, according to John Roberts, but there we go, I guess.
Yeah, and the other question that I had, and I brought this up earlier with Ro Khanna, congressman from California. I said, does this ruling expand his power? I mean, there were several countries that were quote unquote banned, but there were a bunch that weren't. Does this now give him the authority to ban all of them now? Because as you pointed out, they kind of punted this back. We don't really have the authority. It's the purview of the president, so it's up to him. And that's kind of what I got from it. Does this now give them the ability to expand it?
I don't know off the top of my head for that one. I'm not a lawyer, but, basically the president said today that he is very eager to take advantage of this. When he was asked if he was going to be moving forward with it, the president quickly said, of course I'm going to be moving forward with it, sort of laughed off the reporter who asked that, and then said that this was basically the final word on this issue. So considering the headspace for where the president is in response to this, it's quite likely that he could very well believe he has leeway to add some additional countries onto this list and survive a legal challenge.
No, I got to tell you, I look at this, and this was that one win that he needed to go see. Everything I've ever done is now vindicated. Not just this part. Now I have the mantle. I am king. I am de Fuhrer. I can just see it. It's going to get worse, man. It's gonna get worse. If you can imagine.
I mean, this is the president where if you give him an inch, he will take a mile.
Absolutely.
We gave him the position as the head of a democratic republic, and he certainly, took a lot more into that than, anybody would imagine. He took an election win where he lost the popular vote and, has been talking about, nonstop over how that has pretty much given him a mandate to do whatever he'd like. So, when Trump gets victories like these, it's not uncommon to see him really just kind of overreach.
No, I fully expect the crazy to accelerate and the fire hose of insanity to pick up.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. We've heard, a while now that the president does have some additional things that are pretty much in his docket. He was walked back a little bit last week when he moved forward with the executive order. We now know that Customs and Border Patrol have sort of backed down from the zero tolerance approach, but we are only just over 500 days into this presidency. We have the midterm elections coming up. The president knows that he has to rile up his base in order to make it past that point. He's said how important it is to get, his supporters on board, and has been more than willing to go on the campaign trail and make just bombastic statements like he did last night in South Carolina. So I would not put it past the president to try to, throw some more red meat to his supporters. What that's going to look like, that remains to be seen. But considering this is something that appeals to the worst instincts of the supporters, probably more so than, sound level-headed appeals to national security concerns, that's a cause for alarm.
No, crazy is definitely, we're at DEFCON 5 right now, as far as I'm concerned. And you just look at this guy and, facts don't matter, boundaries don't matter, precedent doesn't matter, the future of the country doesn't matter, our image doesn't matter, none of that stuff matters. And for his base, look, they're eating it up. I mean, this thing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's amazing to me that, there's one person that I talked to who, just last week told me that, it's, a business owner should be able to do whatever they want. And if their cake maker doesn't want to let those queers have cake, no cake for them. And then only to tell me the other day that it was wrong. And he's outraged that Sarah Huckabee Sanders was booted out of a restaurant. I'm going, how can you have both? How can you possibly take both positions? And easy. They're very good at this kind of idiotic gymnastic.
I mean, the fact that we have the White House arguing for more civility in politics is just bizarre on the face of it, considering that the president, stoked a lot of outrage. He portrayed himself as the disruptor. He's governed as a disruptor. He's governed as somebody who is more than willing to make provocative statements. And during the same day where that message was coming across, accused a restaurant of being, dirty, despite the fact that, if you look at the health inspection reports for Trump's properties, they're not anywhere near as good as the Red Hen. I kind of did the legwork on that yesterday. It was sort of a weird day. Calling Maxine Waters low IQ, and then, leading the chants against the media and not turning down calls for lock her up at his rally that night. But for some reason, those on the left, including the owner of a restaurant, that's not a public figure, that's never really been in the mainstream conversation before, is the one who needs to shape up. So it just really highlights how the president is playing by different rules, and that's something that's being supported by his White House, and I guess tacitly in the conversation that we're having over civility, being supported by the media and a good portion of the public as well.
No, I mean, I generally am not someone who likes the idea of sending someone away, and I've said this from the very beginning. If you open your business to the public, it should be to all the public. There should be no discrimination, none of that. Business is business kind of mentality. If you want to go home and kick the dog and cry and scream and carry on or whatever it is that you do, that's your business. But in the public sphere, civility has to be part of the day. But I'll be honest with you. You look at this. Where we are, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was the poster child for this to happen to. The daughter of the Christian warrior Mike Huckabee, and the lion, the mouthpiece of the Lion King. It's just she was the perfect storm, and for her, to the curb with you.
I mean, she's the face of the administration. She is the person who the public is basically presented with in terms of articulating what the administration wants to do and what they want to put out there. Every day when we have the briefing, although it's not really every day, it's really now edging out to be, I guess, more once a week when we have a briefing. She spars with reporters. She, says disrespectful things, but ultimately that is an audience that is going to the American people. And if you are not believing that the administration is reflecting your interests, you are going to feel insulted by Sarah Sanders, perhaps much more than the people in the room who, are paid to be there and understand that they are playing sort of an adversarial role.
Yeah.
This is somebody who is speaking to the public, and it's not really that much of a surprise that a lot of the public is angry.
No, I mean, you look, and I've been saying this for years. The left, the center left, the center, they've put up with the extreme right wing of this country for a long time. Pulling their shenanigans, and I go back to the town hall with Arlen Specter back in 2010. Where you just had these people who were just screaming at him in his face, pointing at, spitting all over him, and get your government hands off my Medicare, and this kind of just collective insanity. And you go, this is what the left and the sane among us have had to put up with for the last 8 years. And I think there's a point at which people just go, you know what, I've had enough.
Exactly, and in that, I just want to remind your listeners, of course, that John Lewis was spat on during that period of time, which, I don't think really bodes very well for that era of civility. I don't really think we saw much there. But, you also have to recall that a lot of members just aren't holding town halls. And in the absence of that, you have people who are looking for people to lash out at. And, when you have your members of Congress who are supposed to be representing you hiding themselves, it, I guess, only makes sense to go to members of the administration when you get that opportunity and to express your displeasure that way. If there's a breakdown in civility, or if there's people who feel like they're not being heard, a large part of that has to do directly with Congress.
And over the weekend, I saw Congressman Steve King tweeted out that America's headed in the direction of another Harper's Ferry. After that comes Fort Sumter, evidently saying we're going to be heading towards the next Civil War. And you look at someone like him, who, I got to be honest, he's been that guy on the forefront, throwing the flames, throwing the bombs, saying the racist, nationalist, hateful stuff for years. He's been getting away with it. And now he cares that we might be heading for a civil war?
Yeah, I mean, also just interesting choice of words there. The fact to immediately associate this with Harper's Ferry, which was, basically a radical abolitionist exercise, is, yeah, of course. I mean, that's very Steve King in terms of the language he chooses to use. But, it basically just shows that there is an inability to police both sides. We had Paul Ryan today saying that Maxine Waters should apologize. we haven't heard him saying that Steve King should apologize for the remarks that he made. He issued, through a spokesperson, a relatively benign statement today saying that Nazis should not have a part of the mainstream political conversation, which is, you know,
we can still agree on that. Can we still agree on
gone.
that Nazis shouldn't have a large part of our political discourse? Are we able to still agree on that, or is that something that's now up for debate?
I mean, I think it's been put up for debate by the president when he said that there were people on, you know,
on both sides,
the side of protesters in Charlottesville who were good people,
yeah.
And then sort of equated people who were anti-fascist with fascists. I think that boat has already sailed. But you know, we don't see any calls for tamping down of the language on the right, and that's solely because they recognize the political reality that this is, you know, good for them heading into the midterms. This gets people riled up. And also, I guess, more darkly, perhaps this is because this is all what they believe, which is kind of a chilling thought when you think about it.
It's going to be an interesting and I fear ugly summer as we move towards the November election. I'm sure you probably saw the video of Elaine Chao being yelled at by a group, you know, asking her how her husband sleeps at night. And, you know, look, this is the kind of frustration and the kind of anger that an elite political class should get when they do the kind of things that McConnell and the rest of them have done, in my view.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
We must pay for, from the cities to the farmlands in trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The unit forever defending rights. Let's fight the right wing, our workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters from many far-off lands.
So it looks like 10 a.m. Wednesday, the Supreme Court's finally going to, as they rush out the door, hand down the Janus decision. It's been, I think the entire country's been hanging, or at least the entire labor community has been hanging on this decision. This will be the legacy of this court. This will be on the lines of the Lochner era. This will be in the lines of the Jim Crow era. This will be the legacy that John Roberts is remembered for generations to come. And which side does he allow his court to go on? Remember, this is the guy who said he's going to call balls and strikes, believed in decided law, states' rights guy, but yet this, I guess, doesn't fit into that. And the question is, what is labor going to do? How are they going to respond? What's the plan going forward for working people across the country, which is why I've asked Jim Williams to come talk with us. He's the president of United Steelworkers Local 8599 out in Fontana, California. Jim, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, sure, Rick. Glad to be here.
So I look at this case, which, you know, look, I'm sure you've been fighting this for years now. You know, first it was Harris, then it was Friedrichs. The sky's been falling for a very long time. What are you and your members thinking at this point about this case?
Well, what we're thinking is that we're being attacked. You know, I don't know how we got in this country to believe that unionism is bad and labor, the working, you know, class speaking with one voice is somehow bad for everybody else. If this case decides the way we expect it to, it means that my union will have to spend a significant portion of our time internally organizing. Not that we don't already do that. You know, we already understand we need to be valuable to our members and educate them on what we're doing. But we know we'll be fighting a publicity war with corporate interests. You know, we know who's behind this. This isn't Mr. Janus, you know, wanting to get his dues money back. This is large corporate interests. It's the Heritage Foundation. It's Alec. It's the Koch brothers. This is who's behind this.
Yeah, and billionaire Bruce Rauner.
Yeah, we think there's going to be another shoe to drop as soon as this decision's made. Then out will come the media campaigns where they'll continue telling America that unionism is bad. And every time, you know, we secure a good contract and make sure that we have a safe working conditions and maybe a pension and some health care, somehow it comes from some other person instead of the actual management or ownership.
Yeah, you know what's interesting to me, Jim, is I've been talking about unions for a very long time, and I remind people that when I started working back in the late '80s, one of the first jobs I took, full-time jobs that I took, I was making more money back then throwing boxes on a shipping dock in a union LTL carrier facility than the workers doing that job today, more than a quarter of a century later. And it's not, economic gimmickry. It's none of that. It's dollar for dollar. And, people go, no, that can't be. And yet you find out, the vast majority of people are working for less. They're working longer, working harder, less health care, less retirement security, less voice on the job, less opportunity. And at some point, I got to ask the question, when do we as a working class say enough is enough and come back to our unions? I mean, you got to give the wealth class credit. They have done a masterful job of divorcing workers from their unions and citizens from their government.
Yeah, and I don't think they're done yet. We know that there's legislation going to come out. Right now, 28 states are right to work, what they call so-called right to work. Really, it's the right to opt out and still be covered by the contract, the right to free ride. 28 states have that already, and as soon as this decision comes out, I think that you'll see a push for legislation in the private sector. This decision affects public sector unions like mine, but as soon as that, as that hammer drops, we think that they're going to push legislation to make the whole nation right to work. And that's not going to be a good thing. You see the Facebook meme that says, if you like your weekend, thank a union. If you like an 8-hour day and overtime for anything after 8 hours, thank a union. That's a cool meme, but it's absolutely the truth. And unions are responsible for, advocating for health care and for a pension so that you don't work 30 years and live on just your Social Security. And how secure is your Social Security? So somehow America has been told that they need to take my pension away so that everyone else who doesn't have a pension will now feel equal. What unions want to do is bring it the other way. Everyone, when we had 30% union membership in America, pension was a common thing. And healthcare was not, 40% of your family budget. So returning to unionism is not a bad thing. It should not be a dirty word.
Yeah, I'm with you. But do you see this as an opportunity? Because I've had some guests who say, maybe this is an opportunity for labor to return to its roots. Before the Wagner Act, you had a much more engaged, much more militant movement. Workers were more tied to each other and tied to their unions. And that, there's this this fanciful kind of, romanticized version of what labor can be, because we're going to all come back together and it's going to be, much more militant workers taking to the streets and all of this. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, it's kind of that thing. You have to hit rock bottom before you can start your way back up. We've all heard that.
Yeah.
And rock bottom in America is really low. I mean, do we have to have a depression? Do we have to have people starving in the streets? We already have income inequality. I love that title. Les Leopold is an author. He wrote Runaway Inequality. I read that book. It talks about where we got to where we are today, or how we got there. Basically, the CEOs of today make 400 times what the guy on the shop floor makes. And it wasn't always that way. 40 years ago, it was like 25 times. It was a reasonable number. And now all your CEOs have stock options. So what did they do with the big tax refund? They bought back stock instead of expanding like everyone thought they would. They bought back their own stock to increase their own stock value.
Yep.
So what we made is 100 people in the nation are fabulously wealthy, and 30 million union members are made to be the scapegoat.
Yeah, and you look at the tax.
So yeah, we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to get back to our roots. We have steelworker locals in all 28 of those right-to-work states. Most locals do very well because they focus on what's important, and they provide value to their members. But this is a money grab, really, because if you opt out, you take your dues with you, and then the local is got less revenue to operate with. It's a simple financial, mathematics.
And starving your ability to fight for better wages, hours, conditions. And also, and this is where the other part of this comes in, Historically, the Democratic Party has relied on organized labor to fund their campaigns because Republicans have been so horrible to organized labor. It's only left them one political choice. And to me, this is just about starving a political enemy.
Oh, exactly that. I mean, when you put this expected decision, the Janus case, earlier was the Friedrichs case, now it's the Janus case. When you put that together with Citizens United, where a corporation is considered a person, can spend unlimited amounts of money buying politicians in America, I mean, it's the perfect storm for the 100 people that want to own America. They want to go back to when, it was a corporate America. And we went through that. And there were antitrust cases. And the government stepped in and said, hey, that's not a great thing for Americans to have 100 people own the whole country. And it seems like they want to go back to that. And who's going to stop them if the unions are all handicapped?
No, you're absolutely right. And you look at our tax code, of which we just made much more unequal and worse. You've got, as you've pointed out, the handful of billionaires who are doing fabulously well, and corporations who got a huge tax break. No incentive to invest in machinery or plants or workers. It's all about hoarding.
It's a disincentive. I mean, you got like Pfizer, the drug maker. They get the big tax refund, and they announce a $5 billion buyback program. And at the same time, in the same year, they're going to end all Parkinson's and Alzheimer's research. Isn't that the opposite of what this corporate tax reduction was supposed to do?
Yep.
It was supposed to fund expansion in research and development. Pfizer decided to spend $5 billion buying the common stock back. That's taxpayer money. And end research on something that affects a lot of American families. I mean, that makes about 12 people at Pfizer just fabulously wealthy. What about everyone else?
Well, the hell with everybody else, Jim. We don't care about them. They're replaceable. We can get some more overseas.
Exactly.
And this is the sad moment that we live in. I mean, this is how bizarre of a time we are, and yet I still struggle with the fact that there are still union members who support this administration and what they see coming. It's mind-blowing to me.
Well, a lot of people vote their own interest. They decide what's most important for them. But if you don't think that your family's, finances and your family's future is of utmost importance, there's something wrong with you. I understand you might want to vote on a social issue. Liberal or conservative might matter to you. I get that. But I have a lot of friends who'll say, hey, I'm socially liberal, I'm fiscally conservative, or just the opposite. But not to support corporations just stealing America out from underneath us and thinking that it's okay for somebody like that Martin Shkreli to buy a drug, the rights to a drug that people need and jack up the price 4,000%. Sometimes regulation is not a dirty word, and this is one of those times.
Well, and sometimes it's a life-saving protection. There's a bunch of that. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. Let me ask you last line of questioning, because when this decision comes down, and I think everybody believes it's going to go the wrong way, what's the next step? I mean, you've pointed out that there's going to be a media campaign coming behind this. We know that they're going to push for this thing that they're calling the Employee Rights Act, the ERA, because you've now got, they want to confuse it with the women's movement. Also, there's going to be a whole disorganizing campaign where they're going to go knocking on doors and trying to convince union members to sign decertification cards and to ask for rebates back and to drop their membership. There's all of this money being spent into really attacking you. How are you guys going to handle this? What is your plan for the day after tomorrow?
So if you're a planner, you make short-range plans, you make medium-range plans, you make long-range plans. In the short term, we know what we have to do in our local. We have to continue to provide good value. The steelworkers have represented the classified staff at the school district for 40 years, and we do a great job there, and we're grounded in our mission. And I think that's our short-term plan. We continue to do that. We just continue to talk to people. I can't match them. They're going to do radio ads and Facebook ads and TV ads. I can't match that. But I can go out and talk to the people that I represent, and I can make sure that we're visible. We're there every day. A more medium-range plan is that we need to band together. There's more than just the steel workers out here addressing this issue. There's Teamsters, there's ask me. There's, there's everybody. In California especially, we have a lot of strong public employee unions. And we haven't talked at all about the teachers unions who really are going to be affected by this. So that needs to be a concerted effort. And we talk about it along. My union participates at the AFL-CIO. We go there at the Central Labor Council. We sit around and we discuss it. We make plans. We make concerted plans on how we can address the issue and how we can continually address both the local problems. I'm from California. In California, I don't think my legislature is going to come down and make me do some kind of a very restrictive card check or reauthorization or recertification. But I think it could happen in other states. We have Wisconsin to look at for the worst case scenario. So we need to band together. There is always power in numbers.
Right.
And we should exercise that power.
And also remember, November.
The House must be flipped. We have to get some traction, or the slide will continue.
We've got to get those members registered, got to get them out to vote, and push back on this, because the damage that they're doing can be undone if we push forward and pursue legislation that's already being banged around. I mean, there's an opportunity, in 2020 to completely undo all of this stuff, and that's, I believe, where we've got to be working. But Jim, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Best to you and your members, and thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you, Rick. Anytime at all.
Good stuff. Jim Williams, he's the president of Steelworkers Local 8599 out there in Fontana, California. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
A union man, brother firefighters, my friend. And the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. A new case of polio, the infectious disease that can lead to paralysis in children, has emerged on the Pacific island of Papua New Guinea, a country that previously declared itself polio-free. The new case is vaccine-derived, meaning a child that had been given an oral polio vaccine likely spread the disease through fecal matter and into contaminated drinking water to another child. That method of infection has been long documented but is exceedingly rare. By the World Health Organization's own count, of the 10 billion doses of poliovirus administered since the year 2000, just 760 children have been diagnosed with vaccine-derived polio.
What is happening in PNG is that you have pockets of population which are not well vaccinated, and therefore the use of the oral polio vaccine, although it's a very rare emergence, can, in some cases, result in vaccine-derived poliovirus paralysis.
That's Michel Zafran, the WHO's director for polio eradication.
It should not be difficult to interrupt this outbreak if we carry out rapidly a good quality vaccination campaign.
Zafran and the WHO speak from experience. Since UN member states set out to eradicate polio in the 1980s, the disease has been almost entirely stamped out.
When we started the eradication effort back in 1988, there were 350,000 cases of paralytic polio every year in 125 countries that were endemic for this poliovirus. We now are down to actually 3 endemic countries. One, Nigeria hasn't had a single case since August 2016. And the 2 that have had cases this year are Pakistan and Afghanistan, and had a total of 11 cases so far.
There is still no cure for polio, but vaccines first rolled out in the 1950s are credited with preventing hundreds of millions of new infections. Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
So it looks like Mittens is going to be the Republican running for Senate in Utah. That'd be interesting. Former governor of Massachusetts running for Senate in Utah. Good for him. Also, the big upset of the night. Joe Crowley went down in New York's 14th congressional district. The longtime incumbent. I've had him on the program a couple of times. I was never thrilled with him. I mean, he was middle of the road Democrat. Was not, he was very moderate in my view. He was very center of the road. Kind of the blue dog era. He was taken out by this Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who had a fantastic video. If you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. I really thought it was one of those really well done videos that every campaign seems to have, and there's been a bunch of them this election season. Every candidate has their 2-minute explainer, and hers is right up there, near the top, along with the woman from Texas with the Doors. I thought that was fantastic as well. But there's been a bunch of them this election season. I guess that's the new normal for campaigning. You got to have your explainer video. But also a couple of the races that I'm watching, Brian Flynn in the 19th congressional district in New York, not doing so well. And I like Brian. I think he's a good guy. But still time to look that out. But it's been really an amazing election cycle, in that you've got so many voices and so many people out there. It's good stuff. Really, really happy to see. I got an email that reminded me of something that I completely forgot. Everyone's all the right wing's all bunched up in the panties over Sarah Huckabee Sanders being shown the door. But Jim reminds me that Joe Biden was shown the door back in 2012 by a Virginia baker who refused to serve him. Now, he was the sitting vice president. And, there weren't big protests. The left didn't, lose their mind. But the Republicans actually invited him, this baker, to introduce Paul Ryan at a campaign rally. So, I'm sorry. I am not giving in to the feigned outrage of the radical right. I'm just not. But you stop and you think about what's happened since, this restaurant owner, with, honest moral convictions said, look, I don't want somebody in here who's snatching babies away from their mothers, who's, pursuing the policies that you're pursuing. I just choose not to serve you. You had Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who used her personal Twitter, her official press secretary Twitter account, not her personal one, to attack and criticize this owner. You had the Republican Party of Virginia, who is in the process of organizing a boycott against this restaurant. You had Alex Jones, who is telling his listeners and his viewers to surveil this establishment. You've got the president of the United States attacking the restaurant as dirty and filthy, which I saw the pictures. It's not. And I'm looking forward to going there very soon. And then you've got all these crazy nitwits who are throwing death threats at this woman. Crazy. And, good on this woman for standing up, honestly. That's simple. Anyway, if you missed any part of the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like tides flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is color to the evil, yes.